So for my board report, talking about grading again, which I know I supposedly finished last time, but we had a brass meeting that had a lot of student involvement in it, and we discussed some things that I thought would be important to share with you. This discussion came out of us talking about a draft IK, which I think has been changed a little bit more and since then. So, but the comments I have on here are not specifically about like the wording on that or anything. They're more general comments that I wanted to talk about. Some of them might seem specific to like just the high school policy, but I think that it's important that all of the schools are aware of these things, because how students perceive the grading system starts in elementary and middle school. So I think it's really important for that to be consistent across, especially in the middle school, but some for the upper grades of the middle school. So that's why they're in here. So the overarching theme is that most of our students, I did talk to our brass members before I published this, is that all of our graded assignments should be graded on a 1 through 4 scale. So
can I stop you there for a moment? So
yes.
I'm assuming you mean that if we're using a 1 through 4 scale, that all assignments should be graded 1 to 4, not necessarily the students saying we want to use the 1 through 4 scale.
Yes, so the discussion we had was with the assumption that we would be using the 1 through 4 scale.
Okay.
So we weren't talking about other systems.
Gotcha. But every assignment needs to be graded on the full range of
yes.
whatever grading scale is being used. That's what that statement is going for.
That was my clarifying question, was whether it's a 1 to 4 or 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, whatever, the formative should match the.
So
yes, that's my understanding. We didn't specifically talk about that, but from the conversation, yes. So for this, you guys probably already know this, but I did include for background information that when we have this discussion, a lot of times we're going to be using the words formative and summative. So while that's not specifically in the wording, we use it a lot. So usually something on assignment that some teachers would consider using a 2 out of 2 or a 3 out of a 3, something like that, that's normally considered formative work. So if I bring that word up, basically that's just work that you do ahead of time that helps prepare you for the summative assignment. So formative work is often a baseline to jump from. So that means that if the baseline is not graded on a 1 through 4 scale, it's often difficult to grade the related assignments. I did talk to some of my teachers about this, and they basically said that if you're working on a skill and you do some formative work about that, it's important that that work is graded out of 1 through 4, so that when you do additional work, you can compare it and see the different levels there. It also gives students information about where they stand, so it's really hard as a student to know what a 2 out of 2 means, because it's such a small, like you either get a 1 or a 2. There's not much there, and as a student doing these assignments, it's confusing to have a 2 out of 2 on something, and then a very similar assignment, similar skills being assessed is now out of a 4. It makes it hard to track your progress, understand where you are. Graded formative work is very rarely work that students would view as something not deserving of a 1 through 4. So the most common thing I hear when we're having this discussion is that assignments that don't show a 4-level skills shouldn't be graded out of a 4, which I understand, and I think just as students we don't see that, and so therefore having those 2 out of 2 options just makes it more confusing. Most of our work, even if it's formative, even if it's a lower level understanding of something, is still work we believe you could grade out of a 4. 2 students, a 4 is doing all that you've been asked to do and doing it to the best of your ability with a high level of accuracy and understanding. That seems like something that you would be able to assess on all assignments, whether it's a complex or simple skill. An analogy I used in here was in English, we wrote a compare-contrast essay about crackers before we wrote the essay comparing a book to a movie. So that's a good example to me of the cracker thing. Like, yes, that's simpler because you're comparing food and not a more complex book and movie, but it's still assessing those skills, and it still should be graded out of 4, and for that one it was. Considering a 4 to be above and beyond, which is some of the words we've been using, I believe that's changing. So, but either way, this is something that I recently thought about, is having that sort of high, super level of reaching does put some students at a disadvantage, and we don't want that. We want our school to have learning opportunities for all students, regardless of where they come from. This is something that I hadn't considered in my previous discussions about the grading system, so I wanted to put that in now, just as a reminder to me and to all of us that that's really important when we're looking at the wording and grading things. allowing teacher discretion on this issue. So it's like, as of right now, some teachers don't grade using anything but 1 through 4 on all of their assignments, but some teachers do. So it's really important that that inconsistency is not there. As I said in my last report, that was sort of the major student concern, is inconsistency, so that definitely plays into it. And then the last thing, this doesn't have specific data to back it up, it was just a potential theme, is the high school is currently facing a really high percentages of students failing in their classes. Keeping all assignments on a 1 through 4 scale could potentially allow more students more options to demonstrate their knowledge in a way that's applicable to their standard scores, potentially making those scores higher. So that is a very small detail, it's only a possibility, but I did want to put it on there. Are there any questions I can answer?
I guess I'll ask one, but I think it's more of a question for Michael, but I assume the above and beyond topic is something that's being discussed amongst the teachers and everybody. Just, I'm gonna date myself, but like, back when I was a kid, there might be extra credit or something like that that would take your grade above, maybe a perfect score or something like that, but the whole above and beyond thing has always been confusing to me, because the grading scale is something, then that's what every student should be able to reach, considering,
Yeah, that's what most students have been saying, and I think hopefully the new wording will support that. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm hoping that it will.
So in the draft policy that the internal policy committee is going to see on the 26th, 4 is the title is proficient with distinction.
Isn't it already, aren't 4s already labeled as such, or no?
No, they were not. With more of a descriptor than just above and beyond, describing what that is.
Other questions for Kate?
Kate, you may not be able to answer this, but why do you think that the high school is currently facing a high percentage of students failing their classes?
Well, we are hopefully going to talk about this at our next BRAS meeting. I think it's something I noticed when I was looking at the data that Mr. Finch had compiled for us, is that it's not just the freshmen, which I think is a common theme in the past, is freshmen coming up, it's sort of like a reality check and saying, oh, like, this is really different, and I think that does have to do with our grading system, and I think our grading system definitely plays a role in it. It's not the only reason, and there's certainly lots of other ones, but I think the fact that it's students from mostly the first 3 grades shows it's not just a simple, like, moving up to high school type thing. I would say the other thing is a lot of the failures were coming from math classes, so I think that definitely is important, changing what resources are offered, or how, I haven't been in a math class at the high school for a very long time, so I don't know what it looks like now, but I think that probably needs to be looked at.
I think the answer is no, but if you guys are looking at these issues from the student level, I wonder if there's any data that can be had by either guidance or by the SAU to see what failure rates were pre-competencies when there was a 100-point scale. Those numbers may be the same, as far as failures versus not failures. I have no idea.
Yeah, I would say that there might be data, but I wouldn't think it'd be comparable, because just because there's so much change in general, I would say it's probably really difficult to compare those looking at just based on the grading changes. We've had a lot of other changes as well that I would say probably impact that.
I was going to ask Mr. Finch's question. I still will, but I'll ask you from a student perspective. But do you think students would benefit from having some type of study skills course, or do you feel like students know how to prepare for, we now have a test at the end of the semester, which is a huge part of their grade. I just question whether our students know how to prepare over the course of a semester for summative exams, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We don't have anything like that right now. I think it's really kind of a personal thing. Like, some students take it upon themselves to really prepare. It does depend on the classes you take. Some classes really prepare you well for that, and some don't, because it's just not a part of how the classes run. So potentially that might be something helpful to some students.
Jim?
So this isn't for you, Kate. This is more a middle school question, and you don't have to answer fully tonight, but I would be curious, as middle schoolers, do you feel like you understand how you're being graded in the middle school?
For the most part, yes.
but it can be a little confusing, just depending on the teacher and how they like use the scale.
So do you find similar, like maybe some inconsistencies with, from teacher to teacher?
A little bit, yes.
Thank you.
I don't know if mine's for Kate, but so last year when we were in, I think it was this meeting talking about the students failing, it was primarily freshmen. And then we were told that you see some 10th grade and then it tapers off. But whereas the bulk of them are coming from math, have there been any other changes? Have there been like staffing changes?
Yeah, we have pretty much mostly new math department. I think we only
That's what I
have
thought.
2 teachers now that have been here for a while, so that definitely is a huge part of it. I don't know specifically, but I've heard a lot of sort of just rumors around me. Most of the students that are talking about failing classes, it's all related to math and it's related to those new teachers.
So a follow-up question, this definitely isn't for you. But are they trained in how to use our grading system with new teachers coming in? Like I know we talked about teachers that have experience with the 1 through 4 and teachers that haven't.
Yeah, so we heard that as a concern at the beginning of this conversation back in August. So one of the things we're putting into place is we're dedicating time prior to the start of the school year for any new staff member coming in to get a full, or I should say, a better understanding of our grading scale prior to starting grading. So we are committing a whole day, quite honestly, to our grading practices and so forth. And from what we've heard is that, again, it varies the skill set of our new staff coming in, working with a 4-point scale. However, the majority of them have experienced either being graded on a 4-point scale, particularly for some of our younger staff that are coming in, or being exposed to a 4-point scale. So we are upping our professional development prior to the start of the school year with our new staff.
So, in general, and I think this probably depends on the course, but take an average math course, for example. I don't know how many over the course of the semester, how many assignments there are before the, I'll call it the big summative at the end. But as a parent, how would I know if my child was having problems in a course? Because I'm always afraid that you would learn too late, if that makes sense. To the point where by the time I find out, they really have to do great the rest of the way just to get competency. I guess that's in the back of my head as far as, I know some families, some kids, they may not even care. But I know that's a lot of families that do, a lot of kids that care. How do we catch this before we're at the end of the semester? Is there progress monitoring? My biggest concern.
Okay, so can I ask just a clarifying question? When you said the big summative, did you mean the final assessment at the end of the course, or do you mean like assessments throughout the class that are kind of end of unit things, or kind of the big cumulative? Which of those two did you mean?
I think you mean summative on the standard, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it's
like-
like, yeah, so a big 4-point assessment that is going in there that is specific to a standard. It varies, honestly. Some of the standards are more aligned to content than other classes that have them more aligned to skills that get repeatedly taught and kind of circle back to. So sometimes what you find is a course has designed standards that are sequential, right? You alluded to math classes, and that's one of them. We all know that math skills are sequential, and you're kind of building on those building blocks. So to answer the progress monitoring, we previously had 2 grade updates. There was one at the end of the first quarter, kind of like a midterm check-in, and then there was a end of semester. We added 2 more, so now there's 4. That actually started last year. So there's 4 different times, and it's just actually Thursday morning is the next time that grades are going to be updated for students. And that's halfway through the first quarter. So it's literally like midterm of the quarter, midterm of the second quarter, and then final. So there's 4 different times, and those are 4 different eligibility checks for sports, extracurriculars, and things like that. So it's tough to answer the first part of the question, like how many formative assessments are there prior to, because it's going to vary. If it's a sequential course, there's usually more, because students don't have as many opportunities to do summatives as the course goes along. What we have found, as the board knows, one of we have two big policy changes in terms of, grading practices this year. So the late policy and the reassessment policy. Some of the students who I think, particularly in some of the sequential standards, were some who had previously been I'm gonna get this done at the last minute, or, pass things in, at the end of the day or whatever. And now there's policy language about it. So it impacted some students that they didn't have an opportunity to reassess on something that happened sequentially, like, those first or second standards, until literally the final. And so their grade was impacted by that for a while. And that was communicated, again, particularly if a student was found on one of the tiers of ineligibility, that was communicated not only by the teacher, but also by Mr. Bellier, who ran the check and sent that out and, sent those notifications. So it's tough to answer the question, but definitively, all grades are updated and all standards that students have had enough opportunity to demonstrate their skill in are updated a minimum of 4 times.
And do formatives go into, like, do families get information on how the student's doing with formative assessments to know, to track progress on a summative?
Yeah, to be honest, that varies too, and it varies more probably than it should.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we need to look at going forward. And, we've been having conversations about learning management systems or grade
Right.
systems or whatever. And that's one of the things that is in my head in terms of how to approach that. Kate, was very eloquent in alluding to, the concept of formative assessment, right? And respectfully, Kate, I'll disagree with you a little bit on some of the things that you said. Because sometimes a formative assessment isn't giving students or isn't asking students to do the absolute utmost of what a standard, could do, or how that could be assessed, or how that could be applied to the real world, things like that. Skills need foundational blocks. If you're utilizing, new vocabulary terms and you're going to end up putting that into a paper or something like that, first you've got to demonstrate that you know what the word means. It could be I know these are really, kind of scaled down, but that could be as simple as you've got 10 vocab words and you do a matching section. Yes, I know the definition and it's a quick little assessment, but then utilizing those in context is a whole different approach. It's a whole different level of skill and understanding and demonstration of proficiency and mastery of that skill. So the way to report those and where to report those is a question when it comes to the grading system, of the learning management system and things like that too. But I think that honestly is probably more internal practice language that we need to look at between now and next year.
Well, and I think I guess speaking as a parent, like I get it philosophically,
Yep.
like you need those foundational skills, but it doesn't make sense from a parent trying to track progress. Like if my son came home with a 2 out of 2,
Mhm.
I'd be like, why do you have a 2?
Mhm.
Well, that's all I could get. Well, what do you mean that's all you can get?
Yep.
Like, so I think that's I personally think that's some of the problem is, what does it mean? When does it mean you can get
Yeah.
4 out of 4 compared to 2 out of 2?
Yeah, and one of the things, so obviously we had a professional development day today, and the high school and middle school staffs got together for the majority of the afternoon to work together to look at policy language and then to get content areas together and look at vertical alignment between grades 5 to 12. Looked at grading scales and proficiency scales, and one of the it was one of the middle school teachers who brought up the point, and then it became, because I worked with the ELA or the English group. And there was a lot of discussion about making sure that students have an opportunity to practice what that 4 looks like, prior to their kind of being set out on their own to do that summative assignment. There has to be instruction, there has to be opportunity to practice what that application stuff looks like, that high level, capacity. Otherwise, students don't really know that they are ready or that they will be successful. So it's absolutely in conversation, and it's got to be something that we work more into practice.
So you definitely hit the head of the nail. I mean, all I can speak to is the middle school. I can't speak to what exists in the high school, but I know for my own kids, and we have that exact conversation, Michelle, where they'll show me something, and yep, it's a 2. Well, that's the highest grade I could that I could get. You can go on and look at their grades, and yep, it's 2 out of 2. 2 out of 2. For these formative assessments, and then when a progress report comes out. They, sometimes they'll still be a 2. And it's like, well, at this point, or report card, or whatever however you want to look at it, if this is the end of a term, and you haven't been given the opportunity to get a 3 or a 4, that's a problem. Or at least I consider that to be a problem.
At the high school, the hardest eligibility check or grade update is the first one of the semester. because, the grading system is built around the process of learning and a student having multiple opportunities and students, having a body of evidence. And the less time a student has, the fewer pieces of evidence they've been able to submit. So the progress report philosophy that we have, or it's in our faculties and staff guidelines and resources document, the progress report is only based on standards in which the student has had opportunities to demonstrate, proficiency. And that doesn't mean all, formative 2 out of 2. So we don't report out on all the standards. There's many standards that at this point, a quarter of the way through the semester, teachers haven't even alluded to yet, let alone taught. So we limit it down, and we only report out on those that they have had an opportunity to that point. And the further you go, the more standards that you have that you can call on.
I'm really curious with math, and I believe students in brass, based on rumor that I'm hearing, are asking questions about competencies related to math. And so I think that could possibly play into the discussion, because there may be some inconsistencies with how one teacher, if a student gets one wrong, that's a 2.5. But another student may, another teacher grading the same thing. It's like, what are you measuring? You're measuring how many the students got wrong, or you're measuring the competency. So I have to, I'll just be honest, I have to wonder how much that factors in to 43 courses, semester 1 by subject. Anyway, I think math is sometimes more black and white, depending on quite frankly, what I've seen from numerous math teachers at the high school is most times it's showing your work and those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's it, we may need to do, we collectively, whoever that is, do a deeper dive into how competencies are being measured in math. Not that I want to lessen how it's being done, but it does give me pause, especially since 30 recovered. Like that's great, but it gives me pause to want to know more.
Yeah, you probably noticed and that department is doing those things, and they are looking at those. You probably noticed in the program of studies that added to I think Sean alluded to a 100-page board packet. Right? There's a lot of revision in the descriptor of a lot of those math courses, and that is in reflection to skill levels that are being seen coming into those classes, making sure some of the foundational skills are there too. So that team is working hard to figure out what it is that needs to change. There's no denial that there needs to be revision.
I'm just, with 107 students eligible for recovery, that just seems like a large.
That's not actually, that's 107 who did not pass within the scope of the semester.
Right.
So, yeah,
That's
sorry.
still a large,
It's huge.
alarming number that
Yeah.
we have 363 students or something around that. To me, do we really have that many students who just are not learning at the rate that they should be learning? Or is it, we don't understand the grading policy? That's just alarming to me that we still have that many. I thought after last year that maybe it would be better this year.
Yeah.
Well, I think it speaks to, what does I know there's no comparison, so let me say that up front. I understand there's no comparison to a 100-point scale, but I have to wonder if we are saying a 2.5 is passing, if we were on a 100-point scale and 63 was a D- and you could get credit, that's 63 to 100. Right now we have 2.5 to 4. So I'm more looking at and I've said this before, the bands so I'm actually questioning, people might not like this, but is 2.5 too high to receive credit? I'm not saying they have competency, I'm saying for credit, but then it begs the question, what does competency mean? I know what it means, but what does it mean in relation to what we're asking? But one could argue when a student got a 63 as a D-, were they actually competent in the subject? Probably not, but they passed and they got a credit. And so I don't know if there's a difference between competency versus credit bearing. Just gonna say that out loud.
According to even our current definition, there is, because a student does not have to be proficient in every single standard in order to get credit for a class. So the exact question that you are asking is a question that is being discussed at every level at the school. Is this an adjustment that needs to be considered?
I don't know how you can get credit for something if you're not competent at it, though.
But the students never did. To be blunt about it,
I know, but if we're moving to a competency-based system, we have to.
Well, and I put this huge red flag up, I forget which district I was helping go into competencies, and I used foreign language as an example. When I took foreign language, I could figure it out on a quiz or on a test if I was writing it out. No conversational skills. So consequently, I didn't get an A in foreign language. I got either B minus, or C plus. Why did I achieve that grade? Because I never had the conversational skills. Now, if you fast forward to foreign language with competencies, and one of those competencies is conversational, French or Spanish, if I perform the exact same way now that I did then I would not achieve that competency. I would not be found competent in that, within that curriculum. Is that right? Is it wrong? I don't know, but it's one of the huge consequences for going to a full competency-based curriculum. Because not everybody is going to have conversational Spanish or French. Not everybody is going to master all of algebra, algebra 2, or trig. Doesn't mean that they don't achieve credit. I can't say that. If you want to live within the world of full-blown competencies, the answer is pretty clear. The answer is no. If you're not competent in the 4 or 5 competencies, then you don't achieve that. And it's a philosophical on what do we want to see.
And I think the argument you just made was in favor of something like what we have right now is the 2.5, because there were basic levels of understanding, which is the 2. But if students, kind of throw your example in, there might be some skills that can be assessed on those paper tests, and you kind of write things out, or you can write conversational French or Spanish or whatever. And so you were at a certain level of proficiency when it comes to that skill, but when it comes to speaking, you may not be strong, but you have to have some level of growth. You got to show some level of skill. So hypothetically, if those were the 2 standards in a course, and one was a 3 and one was a 2, at present, at the moment grading practices of high school, you could still get credit for the course.
This is something that Brass has talked about on a couple of occasions. We are a group of pretty high achieving students. We were all elected at some point to a position, so most of us have pretty good grades. It's not a requirement to be in Brass, but that's just sort of how the group is. So knowing that our perspective has mostly been 2.5 seems appropriate, because it doesn't make sense for students to be passing the course if they don't understand the content. But at the same time, that's sort of our perspective going into it, is that we tend to have pretty good grades, so passing with the 2.5 is attainable for most of us. I would be curious to see, I talked to some students about this, but what other students who don't always hit that passing mark, how their perspectives might differ on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading this and I'm going back and forth. I'm wrestling in my own head about my desire. I'm just one person here. My desire to, raise the bar and have students that graduate that are great students going to high achieving, wherever they want to go.
Yeah.
But then I'm worried about setting the bar so high we're setting kids up to fail maybe.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a subset of students that are going to struggle in this concept, and whether it's this year or next year, if we don't make any changes, it's just going to continue on.
Well, and we just saw last month that, or last month that we had students leave the high school.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's because they weren't making the mark. I don't know that, but I don't know. And again, I don't want to set low standards either. That's not what I'm saying, but I think we have to wrestle with what is credit bearing, what are we expecting?
Yeah. So later on, you have this section, which is great, attendance participation rate by students who did not recover a course credit.
Yeah.
And it's clear that there are students that are just not putting in the effort. They're not
Right.
showing up. Yeah, so 20 of the kids didn't show up for 0 days, basically.
Right. So I do want to put one little asterisk on that. And I can go back, I don't think it's a whole lot, it's probably a small handful. But keep in mind, if you look at the number of students who qualified for recovery, it is not a direct correlation between the number of students and the number of courses, because some of those students qualified for multiple. So there are, again, it's not all of them, but there are a handful of students in here who didn't attend a course at all or often because they were elsewhere working on another course, like recovering another course. Okay, does that make sense? So a student who qualified for 2 different courses, they may have gone to both of them 4 days, or they might have gone to one of them for 2 days, knocked out the recovery, and then made the transition to the other one. Or it was taking them a longer amount of time to recover one of the courses, and so they didn't have as many days in the other.
Yeah, but if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, I mean, we're not, there's not that many students that are in so many days for one class that they can't
Correct.
appear for another one.
Yeah, I guess I'm just concerned about, we do have a subset of students that appear, at least to me, looking at this, that they're not even putting in the effort.
Yes. So,
And
yeah, sorry.
I certainly don't want to lower the bar for the sake of lowering the bar because of effort. But I don't know how we as a school district get through to them and their families. And when I say families, I'm thinking of traditional families, but as, I'm well aware, there are a lot of families, there's a lot of kids that don't even have traditional families now. And it's just, I don't want to lose those kids. And I don't know how we get through to them because they obviously don't want to show up in some cases.
Yeah. Or finally, they show up and all of a sudden they're able to demonstrate proficiency. And, you see some of those kids that, that's not the attendance rate for every single kid. Keep in mind, these are only the attendance rates for those who did not recover. Because we had some kids who were there for, even more to your point, who went for 2 or 3 days, wrapped up the work that they, had done poorly on or hadn't done at all or whatever, and they were able to demonstrate that, and then they earned credit and moved forward. These are just the kids who did not get credit. And only 2 of them, out of all of those, courses that they qualified for, went for more than 50% of the sessions and still didn't make it. 2. So that's why I try to break it down by the, even by the percentage there. I would say a genuine, effort and attempt would be more than half of the days that we offered that program, plus the kids who did recover. It was 96.6%. It was 57 out of 59 kids who that describes, were able to get it. So I know what you're saying as well. There is a heck of a balancing act to consider right now, because I don't like the number 107. Of course I don't like the number 107. And when I put that number up on the board in a faculty meeting, people at the faculty meeting didn't like that. So we did an activity, and Kate, it's the same activity that we did when we were in brass, where there were statements that were written that were, you have 4 options. And, physically people got up and they moved to different locations. It was either they strongly disagreed, they agree, or they strongly agreed with the statement at hand, right? And one of the statements was a 2.5 course score is too high a mark to earn credit. And the vast majority of educators stood on they strongly disagreed or they disagreed that is too high a mark. But then I literally said, well then, how do we have 107 kids who didn't earn credit within, now again, some of those other kids earned credit, over 57 of them in recovery then earned credit, which is great for recovery, but it begs the question, okay, so what has to change? What multiple things have to change? And Kate, we did that same activity, and there were 8 students there that day. And, again, Kate is a very eloquent student, and she recognizes that the students in brass are active and engaged students who, generally speaking, do well in their courses. 7 of the 8 of them in that moment said, no, 2.5 seems pretty reasonable. Some of the other comments, and, step in if you want, Kate, if you remember anything specific. You kind of have to just, show up and give a little bit of effort to get at least a 2 or a 2.5. Like it has to go to at least that mark. But then that conversation shifted a little bit because one student, and I'm not going to name the person's name, but one student said, but what about that kid, and we've alluded to that hypothetical kid a couple of times tonight, what about that kid who, generally speaking, is just going to get by?
Right. What's a 2.5 equal on the 100-point scale that nobody wants to tell?
It doesn't.
Well, no, I'm asking. I am forcing a conversation. Michael.
Thank you. So.
Wait, can you tell me what it equals?
On the draft policy, we have a 2.5 equating to a C. Again, I shouldn't say equating, as a reference point.
Correct.
Okay, for people. So I'm going to share my opinion. I wasn't asked, but I'm going to share it anyway.
Okay, thank you.
So that exercise that Mr. Finch went through with the staff around asking whether 2.5 is too high or not, that's because I have a concern that 2.5 is too high, and it's not capturing those students that are working very, very hard, doing the best that they can, and not able to achieve a 2.5. I think that the 2.5 is too high. So that's where that exercise came from. My concern prompted that exercise. I also think that we need a grading expectations policy particularly have Mr. Finch work with his staff to develop a grading expectations policy that all teachers abide by in order to build consistency.
Great.
I also think that there needs to be more graded assignments so that a student's grade doesn't rely on potentially a handful of assignments or assessments, if you will. I think grades need to be updated more frequently for families. We just did a demonstration with Alma the other day and what the capabilities of their grade book is, particularly around grading and reporting. So we are looking at that, but more specifically in a grading expectations policy, you would outline when grades need to be updated, and I think they need to be updated more frequently so students and families, parents, guardians know more frequently as to what the student's grade is at that current time. We did put in the draft policy IKA, might not be popular wording, but this is wording that I specifically came up with, is that no assignment or assessment that is not graded on a 4-point scale, at a 4-point, goes into the calculation of a grade. So it still gives teachers the opportunity to give assignments, say a 2 out of 2, because there are foundational assignments that are given, formative assignments, or 3 out of 3. However, in the overall course calculation or course content or content area calculation, that if an assignment is not at a level of a 4, a student doesn't have an opportunity to achieve a level of 4, then it shouldn't go into any type of mathematical calculation. So those are some of the areas that I feel need to be addressed, that I've started the conversation in addressing those. But I specifically, my own personal opinion is that the 2.5 is too high, and that we need to capture a population of students that are working very hard that not necessarily can achieve that 2.5. So I think all of those things we need to work towards and move. I do feel that the draft policy that the Internal Policy Committee is going to see is going to address some of these concerns. It's not going to hit a 100-point scale mark. It's not going to show, it's not going to hit specifically, we're not going to a letter grade, but it does give a reference point, and I think of you every time, Jeff, that I want a parent and a student to be able to look at a 4-point scale and have a reference point. So we've been working very hard on this, but I do feel that there are grading practices that need to be hashed out, and that there is a specific expectation that is outlined so that it builds consistency with our teachers. And I'm talking specifically at the high school level right now, because I'm not hearing the same concerns at the middle school. And when we get to the high school, it's a much higher stake. We have credit-bearing courses that are at stake. So that's where I'm at this point. And that's what we're really trying to work toward.
So, Mr. Jersey, I'm not going to disagree with much of what you said, what you just said. If in comparatively, speaking, when you're wanting to try to that equate, if we backed up in a traditional 100-point scale, you're looking tests and quizzes. They tests would be worth 20%. Throughout the course of a term. Your quizzes might be 15%. Your final is going to be 10%. And midterm is going to be 10%. Homework is probably going to be in there somewhere, 10% or 15%. But competencies doesn't adjust. It doesn't even factor in. You can't get any credit, for lack of a better term, for the homework, which is what you're talking about, where students are working hard. They're just not quite achieving that, and that's I think the failure point of competence is. But again, like I said, I'm not going to disagree with much of what you said. The flip side of that coin, I just wanted to ask you, for purposes of planting the seed, would some of these students that aren't quite making that or climbing over that hurdle or that bar, should we be starting to engage in a conversation with other districts about a regional alternative school? And would that help the situation? I don't know. You know the student body better than we do. And would that, would that be a good course?
Well, 2 responses to that. One, particularly after this data and working with the Belmont or the high school's at-risk team, we've had, and Tanya has been a part of the conversations about, okay, so what are some programming considerations that we can make? We're looking at trying to identify kind of cohorts of concern, I guess is one way to look at it. What is kind of the background of some of the students are not being successful. The issue that is going to come up if you're talking about some sort of new programming or new school is going to be money. And There used to be an alt school at Laconia High School, and I believe Belmont is prior to my being here. But when I was at Winnisquam, we had students who attended the alt program at Laconia. I believe Belmont had some students who attended the alt program, and it was not cheap. And Laconia High School, was footing the majority of that bill, from what I understand, and it got to a point where they couldn't sustain it anymore. And it was not quite on their, it was like across the street from their campus, and it was an alternative. I wasn't in it enough to say it was a great alternative, but I would say it was an alternative for some of the students. But when that dissolved, it dissolved.
I think to your question, Mark, you're talking about potentially a handful of students. My concern is a larger percentage of students that we need to capture and address.
Good.
And I do not feel, I strongly don't feel that competency-based education is the issue or the concern around capturing these particular students or this population. I think we really have to look more closely at our grading practices. Not necessarily the grading scale, which we have significantly, but it's the grading practices in general. Not losing sight of the importance of the teaching and learning. Grading reporting is on the tail end. Teaching and learning is the most important aspect of everything that we do. So we've made great strides. We've been working on this since August, and there's still more work to do, but I do feel that what we're going to be bringing forward at the end of this month, particularly around our grading scale, is going to help address some of these concerns. But the ones I laid out tonight that I still have concerns about, we need to address.
I have a question. In the grading practices, would that have examples or some sort of concrete way for teachers to look, make sure it's consistent how they're applying their grades across? I don't know how you do that, but I noticed a lot of times it's hard to go from the terminology to what it actually looks like in the classroom. So would it include something to help bridge that gap? I guess is the question.
I don't know at this point, Kate. I'm raising my thoughts and my opinions, and one of the nice things about working in this district is that we work with the staff and the students to make these adjustments along the way. We might not agree throughout the process, however, we usually come out on the other end with something that's going to work for everybody. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I have an additional question for Mr. Finch on the recovery documents. So as I go through this, the very last section under outcomes is failed below recovery eligible by department. There's math, English, science, social studies, applied arts, and then there's another department added that wasn't referenced anywhere else in this document.
Special education or support courses.
Are those students that are part of that program, or are those classes offered in that?
No, it's students who are involved in some of those, special education specific. They are special education specific students who did not achieve credit in some of the courses that are specifically designed and instituted for their support. Ones that are credit bearing.
Special ed sport, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Thank you.
Which includes, Sean, one course that is called Skills for Success. I know you're relating to, do we have a course? We have a course, Skills for Success, but it's limited in scope to, a certain population.
When we're doing finals week, when the students are doing finals and it's being assessed across all competencies?
It's not every standard.
Well, it might depend on the class.
Correct. Yeah, it's not universal that it's on every standard.
Right. Where does that go? Will depend on how they structure it, but where does it go? Meaning, if you have my most recent experience would be honors calculus, right? And I know how he did, so I'll use him, my son. But he was assessed in all areas of calculus, and I know what his grades were, but I have no idea how that factored into the standards.
It's a cumulative opportunity for them to demonstrate the standards. It goes into that same body of evidence that other pieces of evidence were in.
It really depends on how the teachers value the final. For some teachers, so my art classes, each assessment that we do gets assessed for all standards. So it just gets added in with all your other assessments for that standard. Some teachers value the final to be more, and that could have a bigger impact on your standard grade. Some teachers value it more equally with all of your other evidence. But the standard grade itself is that's not calculated, the teacher just looks at the evidence and chooses the grade to put in. So it does differ, how the different teachers value the different assignments.
So that's another level of inconsistency
Yes.
from class to class.
Potentially, yeah.
Well, it's also somewhat dependent on, if a student was coming into the final and they were really struggling at a standard, and all of a sudden it clicked,
That has
and that
data
student
that shows
demonstrates that cumulative understanding,
Yeah, no, I.
that's
just-
significant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Some teachers like average out all your work to get a standard grade, and some teachers don't. It just depends.
Hmm. Okay. Any other questions? How many students did not qualify for credit recovery? Is it 107 minus 67?
The failures below recovery eligibility by student was 57. So if again, we're playing the hypothetical game, if the mark was a 2.0 and no other factors were considered, then that would be the number of students who did not pass at least a course in the first semester. It would be down to 57.
How many courses or students, or I don't know, were below being able to be eligible for recovery
57 students,
out of the 107?
correct.
Wow.
Now, keep in mind that that could be a student who is represented in both the recovery eligible and not eligible portions. Because if a student had a 1.0 in one class, they were not recovery eligible. If they had a 2.2 in another, they were. So that one student could be in the 57 and in the 67.
Which is why there's a difference if you add them together.
Correct.
And it comes to 124 versus 160.
Yeah. So if you look to the right of that number as well, Michelle, like you see, I tried to break it down by the number of courses that were failed by those particular 57 students. So you see that there are some students who very poorly. One thing as well, I know you're talking about grade levels and freshman failures versus others. One thing to note, at least to some degree, is that's based on more or less the age of the student. So a sophomore who did not pass a freshman Foundations of Literature course and had to repeat it, if he or she did not pass it again as a sophomore, that would be considered a sophomore who did not pass a class, even though it was a freshman class. So when it was broken down by grade level, it was by the student, not by the grade level of the anticipated grade level of the class.